The crack of gunfire echoed through the prestigious Westfield Marksman Academy as Sarah Chen stood at the entrance, her weathered hands clutching a worn leather case. At 45, with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a faded denim jacket over khakis, she looked utterly out of place among the gleaming tactical gear and crisp uniforms surrounding her. The Academy's mahogany-paneled lobby reeked of old money and newer arrogance, its walls adorned with photographs of championship Wintersall men in expensive shooting attire, their smug faces frozen in eternal self-satisfaction. "Can I help you?" The receptionist's tone suggested Sarah had wandered into the wrong building, perhaps looking for the craft store next door. The young woman's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on the marble counter as she gave Sarah a dismissive once-over. "I'm here for the annual championship qualifier," Sarah replied quietly, sliding her registration form across the counter. "Sarah Chen. I registered online last month." The receptionist's eyebrows rose incrementally as she scanned the document. "The championship, ma'am? That's for professional marksmen. Perhaps you meant to sign up for our ladies' recreational Tuesday morning class?" Before Sarah could respond, a commanding voice cut through the lobby's ambient chatter. "What's the holdup?" "Madison, we have serious competitors waiting." Marcus Thornfield strode toward them, every inch the image of privileged authority. At 38, the Academy's star instructor and three-time national champion moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. His custom tactical vest bore patches from elite competitions across the country, and his steel blue eyes held the cold assessment of someone who measured worth in trophies and endorsement deals. "This lady claims she's registered for the championship qualifier," Madison explained, emphasizing lady as if it were synonymous with delusional. Thornfield's gaze swept over Sarah with practiced disdain, taking in her simple clothes, the calluses on her hands, the absence of any branded gear. "The qualifier isn't a tourist attraction, ma'am. These men," he gestured to the competitors, warming up in the visible range area, "have trained for years. This is dangerous equipment, not toys." Sarah's expression remained neutral, though something flickered behind her dark eyes. "I understand the risks, Mr. Thornfield. I've handled firearms before." "Have you now?" His laugh was sharp, designed to cut. "Let me guess you shot tin cans with your grandfather's .22 on the farm? This is precision marksmanship, not barnyard plinking. We're talking about 1,000-yard shots, wind calculations, ballistic coefficients, mathematics and physics, not just point and shoot." The other competitors had begun to gather, drawn by the spectacle. Among them stood Blake Harrison, Thornfield's protege, an heir apparent to the Academy's legacy, his designer shooting jacket probably worth more than Sarah's car. "Mark, just let her try," Blake suggested with a cruel smile. "Might be educational for everyone to see what happens when amateurs think they can play with the professionals." Thornfield considered this, then nodded slowly. "You know what? You're right. Sometimes the best lessons are learned through humiliation." He turned back to Sarah. "Tell you what, Mrs. Chen, Miss Shen, Miss Shen, I'll personally oversee your qualifier. When you inevitably fail to even hit the target at 300 yards, you'll agree to leave and stop wasting everyone's time. Deal?" Sarah's fingers unconsciously traced the worn leather of her case. Inside lay her father's rifle, untouched for 5 years since the day she'd walked away from a life that had demanded too much and given too little back. "Deal," she said simply. As she followed Thornfield toward the range, she heard the whispers and snickers behind her. They had no idea that 20 years ago, she'd been Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Marine Corps Scout Sniper School honor graduate. They didn't know about the classified operations in Afghanistan, where she'd earned a reputation for impossible shots that saved countless lives. They couldn't see the silver star hidden in her jewelry box at home, or the letter of commendation from a general whose son she'd protected with a shot that military historians still studied in advanced tactical courses, but they would learn. Sometimes the most powerful statement wasn't made with words, but with the precise placement of lead on a distant target. As Sarah entered the range, she allowed herself a small, private smile. They wanted a lesson. She'd give them one they'd never forget. The Westfield range stretched before them like a monument to excess, climate-controlled shooting positions equipped with digital wind meters, computerized scoring systems, and custom rests that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sarah noted the other competitors preparing their equipment: custom rifles with barrels that gleamed like jewelry, stocks carved from exotic woods, scopes that could probably see into next week. Position 12. Thornfield announced loudly, guiding her to a lane at the far end. Standard Caliphie rules. 5 shots each at 100. Sanbei, Wubei, and 800 yards. Passing score is 180 out of 200. Though I doubt we'll need to worry about calculating your score. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Sarah set her case on the bench and opened it slowly. The rifle inside was nothing special to look at: a weathered Remington 700 that had seen better days. The stock showed scratches and wear. The barrel's bluing had faded in spots, and the scope looked positively ancient compared to the technological marvels on display around her. The watching crowd's amusement was palpable. Jesus, did she pull that out of a pawn shop? Someone muttered. Probably her dead husband's. Another voice added, bet she doesn't even know how to load it. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the action, verifying the scope mounts, feeling the familiar weight. This rifle had been her father's before it was hers. Carried through Vietnam, where he'd served as a Marine sniper. She'd rebuilt it herself, learning the intricate mechanics from him in their garage. Understanding that true marksmanship wasn't about equipment, but about the connection between shooter, rifle, and target. Need help figuring out which end the bullets come out of? Blake called out, earning laughs from his entourage. I think I can manage, Sarah replied, her voice carrying a hint of something that made Blake's smile falter slightly. As she settled into position for the first shots, Sarah let her body remember. The way her breathing slowed, each exhale measured and controlled. The way her heartbeat seemed to quiet, creating perfect stillness between beats. The way the world narrowed until only the fundamentals remained. Sight alignment, sight picture, respiratory pause, trigger squeeze. Her first shot at 100 yards drew chuckles. She'd hit the target, certainly, but in the outer rings, amateur hour. Their expressions said, the second shot was better, closer to center but still nothing impressive. By the 5th shot, she'd managed a respectable grouping that might have earned praise at a casual range day, but was laughably inadequate for championship standards. Well, that was adorable, Thornfield announced. Shall we move to 300 yards? Or would you like to save yourself further embarrassment? Sarah began adjusting her scope with deliberate slowness. What none of them realized was that she'd been analyzing far more than just her target. Wind patterns in the range, the subtle air currents from the ventilation system, the way the fluorescent lights created minute heat differentials. Her amateur shots had been reconnaissance. Gathering data, her trained mind processed automatically. I'll continue, she said. The 300-yard stage brought a shift in the atmosphere. Sarah's first shot struck dead center, the electronic scoring system chiming its surprise. The second shot landed so close to the first that they appeared to share the same hole. By the 5th shot, she'd achieved a grouping that would make any professional proud. Lucky shots, Blake muttered, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. At be yards. Sarah made a show of struggling with her scope adjustments, fumbling with the turrets in a way that suggested confusion. Thornfield moved closer, his condescension practically radiating. The elevation turret is the top one, he explained slowly, as if to a child, At this distance, you'll need to account for bullet drop. Though honestly, I'd be impressed if you even hit paper. Sarah's first shot at 500 yards struck not just center, but the exact center of the X-ring. The range fell silent. Her next 4 shots created a group that could be covered by a quarter, each hole precisely placed with mathematical perfection. "What the hell?" someone whispered. Now it was time for 800 yards. Where the real separation between amateurs and professionals occurred. At this distance, countless variables came into play when drift. Barometric pressure, humidity, even the Coriolis effect could influence the bullet's path. Most shooters needed spotters and calculating devices. Sarah simply looked downrange, her eyes reading information. Others needed instruments to detect. "This should be interesting," Thornfield said, though his bravado had evaporated. 800 yards is where we separate the wheat from the chaff. Even our advanced members struggle with. The crack of Sarah's rifle interrupted him. Downrange. The steel target rang with a perfect hit. She worked the bolt with smooth efficiency. Brass casings hitting the ground in a steady rhythm. 5 shots. 5 hits. Each striking within a 2-inch circle that would have been impressive at half the distance. The electronic scoreboard updated with her final tally, 198 out of 200. It wasn't just a passing score, it was among the best ever recorded at Westfield. Sarah stood slowly, safing her rifle with movements that spoke of decades of practice. The range had fallen completely silent. Dozens of eyes staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to something approaching fear. She turned to face Thornfield, whose face had gone pale. "How?" he managed to ask. Sarah considered her response carefully. These men had built their entire identities around their shooting abilities, their expensive equipment, their exclusive club. Part of her wanted to reveal everything: her military record, the operations she couldn't discuss, the lives she'd saved with shots that made today's display look like child's play. But she realized that would only shift their perception from dismissal to awe. And she wanted neither. "My father taught me," she said simply. He believed that marksmanship was about patience, discipline, and respect for the weapon, not about expensive gear or exclusive clubs. Blake stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperate curiosity. "But those shots, nobody shoots like that without professional training. Who are you really?" Sarah packed her rifle carefully, each movement deliberate. "I'm exactly who I appeared to be when I walked in. A middle-aged woman who wanted to qualify for your championship. The only difference between your perception and reality is that you assumed appearance determined ability." She closed the case and turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Thornfield, your scope is canted about 2 degrees to the left. That's why you've been pulling your shots lately. Might want to check your mount screws." The truth of her observation hit him like a physical blow. She diagnosed his equipment problem just by watching him prepare, showcasing a level of expertise that went far beyond mere marksmanship. As Sarah walked toward the exit, a woman's voice called out, "Wait!" She turned to see a young woman in her 20s. One of the few female faces in the crowd. Unlike the others, her expression held admiration rather than shock. "I'm Jessica Martinez. I've been trying to break into competitive shooting for 2 years. But..." She gestured helplessly at the sea of male faces. "They make it clear I don't belong." Sarah studied her for a moment, recognizing the hunger in her eyes. The same drive that had pushed Sarah herself to excel in the Marines despite every obstacle. "What position do you shoot from?" "Prone. Mostly. But I've been working on standing." "Your stance is too rigid," Sarah interrupted gently. "You're fighting the rifle instead of working with it. And you're anticipating the recoil, which is throwing off your trigger pull." She paused, making a decision that would change more than just this moment. "I'll be at the public range on Riverside Road tomorrow at dawn. If you're serious about learning, be there." Jessica's face lit up. "Really? You'd teach me?" "Someone taught me once," Sarah replied. "It's only right to pass it on." Thornfield found his voice again. Anger, replacing shock. You can't just walk in here, disrupt our qualifier, and start poaching our members. Sarah turned back to him, and for the first time, allowed the steel beneath her calm exterior to show. Mr. Thornfield, I'm not poaching anyone. I'm offering to teach someone you've already dismissed. Just like you dismissed me. The difference is, I see potential where you see inconvenience. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of several other women who'd been relegated to the edges of the crowd. The offer extends to anyone who wants to learn real marksmanship, not just how to buy expensive toys and swagger around in tactical gear. The challenge, in her words, was unmistakable. Several of the men shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that their thousands of dollars in equipment hadn't protected them from being outshot by a woman with a rifle older than some of them. This is ridiculous. Blake sputtered. You got lucky. One good round doesn't make you an instructor. I challenge you to a shoot-off right now. Best of 5 targets. Varying distances. When I win, you apologize for wasting everyone's time and never come back. Sarah sighed. She'd hoped to leave without further confrontation, but she recognized the look in Blake's eyes. He was Thornfield's protege. In more than just shooting, he'd learned the same need to dominate, to put others in their place. If she walked away now, nothing would change. Jessica and the others would still face the same barriers, the same dismissive attitudes. And when I win? She asked quietly. Blake laughed, but it sounded forced. Name it. When I win, Westfield opens a women's training program. Real training. Not just ladies' recreational Tuesday. Equal access to all facilities and competitions. The stakes landed like a bomb. Thornfield stepped forward. Blake, you don't have the authority. Deal. Blake interrupted, his pride overriding common sense. Marcus, set it up. Let's finish this. As word spread through the facility, more people crowded into the range. Someone had even started a live stream. The chat already exploding with comments as viewers tried to understand what they were witnessing. Sarah noticed several women typing furiously on their phones, spreading the word through networks that existed in parallel to the official shooting community. The shoot-off format was simple but brutal. 5 targets at unknown distances, revealed only seconds before each shot. No time for careful calculation. Just pure instinct and skill. Blake went first. His performance impressive by any standard. He hit all 5 targets. Though his grouping loosened under the time pressure, then it was Sarah's turn. She stepped to the line with the same calm she'd displayed all day. But those watching closely might have noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor. The apologetic uncertainty was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. This was no longer about proving herself, it was about proving a point. The first target appeared at 200 yards. Sarah's shot rang out almost instantly, the steel singing its confirmation before most people had even registered the distance. The second target, Altuzaliarts, barely had time to stop swinging before her bullet found center. By the third target, at 425 yards in a crosswind, the crowd had gone completely silent. It wasn't just that she was hitting the targets, it was the speed, the efficiency, the absolute certainty of each shot. Blake had shot well. Sarah was operating on an entirely different level, one that spoke of training and experience beyond anything civilian competition could provide. The fourth target appeared at 775 yards, partially obscured by barriers that simulated real-world conditions. Sarah's adjustment was so fast it seemed automatic, her shot threading through a gap barely larger than the bullet itself to strike dead center. The final target was the challenge 900 yards. With wind flags showing gusts from multiple directions, Blake had hit it, but barely, his shot catching the outer edge. Sarah took an extra second, her eyes reading information in the environment that others couldn't see. When she fired, the bullet's path seemed to curve impossibly through the conflicting winds, striking not just center, but the exact middle of the X-ring. The scoreboard told the story in stark numbers. Blake, 189 points. Sarah, 200 points. Perfect score. Blake stared at the display, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally something that might have been respect. "Who are you?" he asked again. But this time the question held no challenge, only genuine curiosity. Sarah considered her answer. These people didn't need to know about the confirmed kills in Afghanistan, the Silver Star, the operations that remained classified. They didn't need to know about the night she'd made a 400-yard shot through a sandstorm to save a convoy, or the time she'd spent 36 hours in a hide site waiting for one perfect moment that prevented a massacre. "I'm someone who learned that the best shot isn't always the one that wins competitions," she finally said. "It's the one that protects what matters." Today, what mattered was showing that talent doesn't care about gender, age, or how expensive your gear is. Thornfield stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This proves nothing. One exceptional woman doesn't mean." "One?" Sarah interrupted. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every woman present. "I see at least a dozen women here who've been told they don't belong. How do you know none of them could outshoot every man in this room, given proper training and opportunity?" She turned to Jessica. "What's your best grouping at 300 yards? Jessica straightened. 4 inches on a good day. With proper instruction and practice, you could have that in 6 months. Sarah stated with absolute certainty. "The limitation isn't your ability, it's the environment that tells you 4 inches is good enough for a girl." The live stream chat was going wild. Comments poured in from around the world, many from women sharing their own stories of being dismissed or discouraged from shooting sports. The hashtag #SarahChen challenge began trending, with women posting videos of their own shooting skills that had been overlooked or minimized. Blake cleared his throat. "A deal's a deal. Westfield will open a women's training program." He looked at Thornfield, something defiant in his expression. "And I think we should ask Miss Chen to run it." The offer hung in the air like a challenge of its own. Sarah could see the trajectory of her quiet life veering off in an entirely new direction. She'd walked away from the military because she was tired of violence, tired of being a weapon. But this was different. This was about building rather than destroying, about opening doors rather than kicking them down. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But if I do, we do it right. No segregation. No pink guns and girl targets. Real training based on ability and dedication, not chromosomes." As the crowd began to disperse, several women approached her with questions, contact information, and stories of their own. Sarah found herself at the center of an impromptu movement she'd never intended to start. But perhaps that was how real change happened, not through grand gestures, but through one person refusing to accept limitations others tried to impose. Thornfield watched from across the range, his empire of exclusivity crumbling in real time. He'd built his identity on being exceptional, on maintaining standards that kept the unworthy at bay. Now, a woman in a faded denim jacket had revealed those standards as arbitrary barriers designed to protect ego rather than promote excellence. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her modest apartment, her father's rifle cleaned and returned to its case. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, emails, and notifications. The shooting community was in uproar, divided between those celebrating the shakeup and those scrambling to defend the status quo. A text from Jessica made her smile. 12 women confirmed for tomorrow morning. We'll bring coffee. Sarah looked at the silver star in her jewelry box, thinking of all the shots she'd taken in service of her country. Tomorrow, she'd begin a different kind of service, teaching women to find their own aim, their own stance, their own voice in a world that had tried to silence them. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number, but she answered anyway. Lieutenant Chen? The voice was familiar, though she hadn't heard it in years. "This is General Morrison. I saw the video. Outstanding shooting. As always. I'm retired. General, I know. I'm not calling to bring you back. I'm calling to thank you. My granddaughter saw that live stream. She's 15 and loves shooting. But she'd almost given up because, well, you know, she's downstairs right now, cleaning her rifle and talking about entering competitions. Sarah felt something ease in her chest, a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. I'm glad. Sire. You know, Shen, you always were one of our best instructors. Maybe this is where you were meant to end up all along. After they hung up, Sarah stood at her window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Thornfield and his supporters wouldn't give up easily. There would be pushback, criticism, probably even threats. But there would also be Jessica and 12 other women, eager to learn what they'd been told they couldn't. She thought of her father, who'd taught her to shoot not because he'd wanted a son, but because he'd wanted his daughter to be capable and confident. He died before seeing her serve in Afghanistan. But she liked to think he would have been proud not just of the medals, but of this moment, this choice to teach rather than fight. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from a name she didn't recognize. Miss Chen. I'm a reporter with National Shooting Sports magazine. We'd like to do a feature on you and the new program at Westfield. The shooting world needs to hear your story. Sarah deleted the message. The shooting world didn't need her story, it needed to change its own. And that would happen one lesson at a time. One woman at a time. One perfect shot at a time. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sarah arrived at the public range to find not 12 women, but 30, ranging in age from late teens to 70s. They stood in small groups, some with expensive equipment, others with basic rifles that showed their newcomer status. All of them looked at her with the same expression, hope mixed with determination. Ladies, Sarah began, setting down her case. Before we start, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to make you shoot like me. I'm here to help you shoot like the best versions of yourselves. That means we start with fundamentals. We progress at your pace. And we support each other. Anyone who can't commit to that should leave now. Nobody moved. Good. Sarah opened her case, revealing the worn Remington. Then let's begin with the most important lesson, respect. For the weapon, for the sport, and most importantly, for yourself. Everything else builds from there. As she began the first lesson, demonstrating stance and breathing, Sarah noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the range. Marcus Thornfield stood watching, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Then he turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped in defeat, or perhaps, Sarah hoped. In the beginning of understanding, the war for inclusion in the shooting sports wouldn't be won in a single day or with a single perfect score. But as Sarah watched her students absorb the fundamentals with eager concentration, she knew the first shot had been fired, and like all her shots, it had found its mark. The weeks that followed Sarah's dramatic debut at Westfield transformed the landscape of competitive shooting in ways no one could have anticipated. What began as 30 women at a public range had grown into a movement that threatened the very foundations of the sport's old guard. Sarah's unconventional methods, focusing on mental discipline over expensive equipment, on understanding ballistics, rather than memorizing rules, produced results that couldn't be ignored. Jessica Martinez became her first success story. Within 6 weeks, the young woman who'd been dismissed as not having the right build for shooting was consistently placing in the top 10 at regional competitions. Her transformation wasn't just in skill but in confidence. The apologetic hunch of her shoulders replaced by the steady bearing of someone who knew her worth. The establishment is getting nervous. Catherine Walsh, Sarah's unexpected ally and Westfield's only female board member, warned during one of their planning meetings, Thornfield's been making calls, trying to get your instructor certification questioned. Sarah looked up from the training schedules she'd been reviewing. Let him. My credentials are solid. even if most of them are classified. Catherine, a 60-year-old former Olympic shooter who'd fought her own battles in the sport decades earlier, smiled grimly. It's not about credentials. And you know it. It's about power. You're showing that their gatekeeping was never about maintaining standards, it was about maintaining control. The truth of this became evident at the state championship preliminaries. Sarah had entered 5 of her students, each carefully selected not just for their skill but for their readiness to face the hostility they would encounter. As they arrived at the Venuth, the prestigious Olympia Range complex, the tension was immediate and palpable. Well, a voice drawled as they entered. The knitting circle has arrived. Brad Coleman, national champion and Thornfield's close friend, stood with a group of competitors, their expressions ranging from amused to openly hostile. Coleman's corporate sponsorships and magazine covers had made him the face of modern competitive shooting, and he wore his status like armor. Mr. Coleman, Sarah acknowledged neutrally, gesturing for her students to continue to their assigned area. Good luck in your events today. Luck? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think luck is going to help when reality hits? When your hobby shooters realize this isn't a feel-good movie but actual competition? Jessica, overhearing, started to turn back, but Sarah's subtle headshake stopped her. This was exactly what she'd prepared them for, the psychological warfare that preceded the actual shooting. The preliminary events began with standard precision rounds. Sarah watched from the coach's area as her students took their positions. She taught them to use the negativity as fuel, to let the dismissive glances and muttered comments sharpen their focus rather than shake it. Elena Rodriguez, a 43-year-old mother of 3 who discovered shooting as a way to reclaim herself after divorce, was first up. The announcer's tone, when calling her name slightly mocking, as if her presence was a novelty act, carried clearly across the range. Elena simply smiled, the same serene expression she wore when managing her chaotic household, and proceeded to shoot a score that put her in 3rd place overall. 1 by 1. Sarah's students proved that talent and training trumped tradition and prejudice. By lunch, 3 of her 5 entries had qualified for the finals. With Jessica leading the women's division by a commanding margin, the atmosphere in the competitors' lounge was electric with barely suppressed rage. Sarah overheard fragments of heated conversations, undermining the integrity of the sport, turning it into some social justice experiment. What's next? Participation trophies? You're enjoying this, Catherine observed, joining Sarah at a corner table. I'm enjoying watching my students succeed. Sarah corrected, the rest is just noise. But the noise was about to get louder. During the afternoon events, technical difficulties began plaguing Sarah's students. Jessica's target system malfunctioned twice, requiring resets that disrupted her rhythm. Elena's scoring display showed errors that took precious minutes to resolve. When Amy Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, had her ammunition questioned and subjected to additional inspection, the pattern was clear. They're trying to rattle us, Jessica said during a break, her jaw tight with frustration. Of course they are, Sarah replied calmly. The question is, will you let them succeed? She gathered her students in a quiet corner. Listen to me. Every malfunction, every delay, every question score, it's a compliment. They wouldn't be trying this hard if they weren't scared. You've already won the battle that matters. Now go win the one on the scoreboard. The finals that afternoon became the stuff of shooting sport legend. Jessica, shooting in lanes surrounded by openly hostile competitors, delivered a performance that would have been remarkable under ideal conditions. Under pressure, it was extraordinary. Her groups at distance were so tight that officials physically examined the targets, unable to believe the electronic scoring. But it was Amy Chen who provided the day's defining moment. During the 1,000-yard event, the showcase discipline that separated elite shooters from everyone else, she was paired in rotation with Brad Coleman himself. The contrast was stark. Coleman with his $15,000 custom rifle and corporate logos. Amy with a rebuilt Savage that she'd bought, used, and modified herself under Sarah's guidance. Coleman shot first, his performance technically perfect, and earning a 198 out of 200. The crowd, mostly his supporters, erupted in approval. Amy stepped to the line amid catcalls and someone shouting, "Go back to the beginner's range." Sarah watched her student settle into position. Recognizing the subtle signs of someone finding their zone, Amy's breathing slowed, her body relaxing into the stance they'd practiced thousands of times. When she began shooting, the range fell silent. 5 shots. 5 perfect scores. The electronic board lit up with a result that tied the range record, 200 out of 200. Coleman's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. She's cheating. No way someone shoots perfect at 1,000 yards with that piece of junk rifle. The range officials, caught between protocol and politics, called for an equipment inspection. Sarah stepped forward. "I'll agree to that if Mr. Coleman agrees to the same inspection. Full verification of all equipment modifications and custom work." Coleman blanched. Everyone knew his rifle contained modifications that, while not technically illegal, pushed the boundaries of competition rules. "That's not necessary. Then neither is inspecting my student's rifle," Sarah said firmly, "unless you're suggesting different standards for different competitors." The standoff might have escalated, but Catherine Walsh chose that moment to arrive with someone unexpected. David Park, president of the National Shooting Sports Federation, the silver-haired Korean War veteran, moved with the careful dignity of his 80 years, but his eyes were sharp as they surveyed the scene. "I heard there was some excitement here," he said mildly. "Miss Chain Amy, is it? Congratulations on your perfect score. I haven't seen shooting like that since another Chen made waves a few months ago." His gaze found Sarah, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Lieutenant Chen, I've been hoping to meet you." The use of her military rank sent a ripple through the crowd. Park continued, his voice carrying the authority of decades in the sport. "I've been reviewing footage from various competitions over the past months. The improvement in women's participation and performance has been remarkable. It seems exclusion was costing us half our potential talent pool." "Sir," Coleman started, but Park raised a hand. "Mr. Coleman, your concerns are noted. However, I've seen the inspection reports. Every piece of equipment used by Miss Chen's students meets regulation. More importantly, their performances speak for themselves." He turned to address the wider crowd. "The Federation will be implementing new policies to ensure equal access and opportunity for all qualified competitors. The sport evolves, or at least, the implications were clear. The old guard's stranglehold on competitive shooting was ending up not through revolution, but through the simple expedient of better shooters emerging from previously excluded populations." Later that evening, Sarah's students celebrated at a local restaurant, their medals and trophies creating an impressive display on the table. The day's success had been beyond their wildest dreams, but Sarah could see they understood it was just the beginning. "They'll push back harder now," Elena observed. "Practical even in victory. This threatens everything they've built their identities around." "Let them," Jessica said, fire in her eyes. "We'll outshoot them every time." Sarah raised her water glass to shooting straight and standing tall, she toasted, and to proving that excellence recognizes no boundaries. As they celebrated, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was brief. "You've made enemies? Shen, watch your back." She deleted it without concern. After facing Taliban fighters through a scope, anonymous threats from insecure men didn't even register, but she made a mental note to increase security awareness for her students. The old guard might be losing on the range, but desperation could make people dangerous in other ways. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to the public range, where Sarah conducted her primary training. A young woman in an ill-fitting suit approached hesitantly, clearly out of her element among the shooters. "Miss Chen, I'm Dana Morrison from ESPN. We're producing a documentary about the changing face of competitive shooting. We'd like to feature your program." Sarah's initial instinct was to refuse, but she looked at her students now, numbering over 50 regular attendees, and reconsidered. Their story deserved to be told, not for fame, but to inspire others who'd been told they didn't belong. "Talk to them," she said, gesturing to her students. "They're the story, not me." The documentary crew spent 3 days filming, capturing not just the marksmanship training, but the community that had formed. Women who'd been isolated in their interest now had a network. They shared equipment recommendations, carpooled to competitions, and, most importantly, validated each other's ambitions in a world that had dismissed them. One segment featured Maria Santos, a 67-year-old grandmother who'd taken up shooting after her husband's death. "He always said it wasn't for women," she told the camera, then demonstrated a 500-yard group that would shame most men half her age. Turns out he was wrong about a lot of things. The documentary also captured the resistance. Cameras were rolling when someone slashed tires in the parking lot during a training session. They recorded the anonymous letters several students received, the attempts to have Sarah's range access revoked, the coordinated online harassment campaigns, but they also captured the response. More women showing up to train, male shooters beginning to speak out against the harassment, and competition organizers realizing that inclusion meant larger fields and more sponsorship opportunities. Marcus Thornfield made one last attempt to reassert control. He announced a Champions Challenge, a high-stakes competition with a $50,000 prize, hosted at Westfield. The catch? Invitation only. With selection criteria he controlled. "It's a trap," Catherine warned. "He'll stack the deck, create impossible conditions." Sarah studied the announcement. "Maybe, but if we don't show up," he claims, "we're afraid. If we do and lose," he says, "it proves women can't compete at the highest levels. So we win." Jessica said simply. She developed into a formidable shooter. But more importantly, into a leader among the newer students. "You've taught us to shoot through worse than whatever games he can play." The Champions Challenge drew national attention. Thornfield had invited the top 50 male shooters, and under pressure, 5 women, all Sarah's students. The format was designed for drama, head-to-head eliminations, increasing distances, and battlefield conditions that included noise distraction and time pressure. Sarah knew Thornfield expected her to compete, to make it personal. Instead, she registered as a coach only, putting the spotlight entirely on her students. The message was clear. This wasn't about her anymore. The competition was brutal. Thornfield had indeed stacked the deck, pairing the women against the toughest opponents in early rounds, scheduling their shoots during the windiest conditions, and implementing random equipment checks that only seemed to affect certain competitors. But Sarah had prepared them for this. They'd trained in rain, in wind, with air horns blaring and strobe lights flashing. They'd learned to find stillness in chaos, to trust their fundamentals when everything else was uncertain. By the semifinals, 3 of Sarah's 5 students remained in contention. The crowd, which had started out heavily partisan, began to shift. Excellence has a way of converting skeptics, and the women were delivering excellence with every shot. The finals came down to Jessica Martinez versus Brad Colmantha, new generation against the establishment, David versus Goliath. If David had trained under an elite Marine sniper, the format was simple. 5 targets, unknown distances, 10 seconds per shot. Coleman went first, his performance solid, but showing the pressure. He'd built his reputation on perfect conditions and unlimited time. Under stress. Cracks appeared. Jessica stepped to the line with the calm Sarah had taught her. Front sight focus, she whispered to herself. The mantra they'd practiced. Let the rest blur. Her first shot rang out at 6 seconds. Perfect hit. The second at 7. Another center strike. By the 4th shot, the crowd was on its feet. When her final shot hit dead center at what the rangefinder revealed to be 100 yards, a new competition record, the eruption was deafening. But the real victory came in Coleman's response. After a long moment, he walked over and extended his hand to Jessica. That was incredible shooting, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I was wrong. You belong here. You all do. The dam broke. Other male competitors began approaching Sarah's students, asking about techniques, comparing notes, treating them as what they'd always been, fellow shooters, who happened to be extraordinary. Thornfield stood alone, his carefully constructed kingdom of exclusion crumbling around him. Within 6 months, he would quietly sell his stake in Westfield and retire from competitive shooting. The academy would be renamed the Westfield Marksmanship Center, with Jessica Martinez as its first female senior instructor, but that was still to come. In the moment of Jessica's victory, Sarah stood with her students as they redefined what was possible. The reporter from ESPN approached, microphone in hand. Miss Chen, how does it feel to have changed the face of competitive shooting? Sarah looked at her students, Jessica grinning with her trophy, Elena showing Amy a new stance adjustment, Maria discussing wind reading with a young man who'd sought her expertise and shook her head. I didn't change anything, she said. I just helped remove the barriers that were preventing it from being what it should have been all along. The talent was always there. It just needed a chance to aim. The camera captured the moment, but Sarah had already turned away, checking her phone where messages from new students waited. Tomorrow there would be more women to train, more barriers to break, more shots to perfect. The revolution in competitive shooting hadn't come through protest or politics. It had come one perfect shot at a time, delivered by women who refused to accept that their dreams were impossible. And at the center of it all was a quiet woman with a worn rifle case, and the radical belief that excellence belonged to anyone willing to work for it. As the celebration continued around her, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Her father would have been proud not of the victories or the recognition, but of the legacy. Somewhere tonight, a young girl was cleaning her rifle and dreaming of competitions she now knew she could enter. Somewhere, a woman was signing up for her first marksmanship class, knowing she'd be welcomed. The shot that started it all had found its mark, and its echoes would resonate through generations of shooters to come. Sarah Chen had walked into Westfield as a dismissed nobody and emerged as the catalyst for transformation. But more importantly, she'd shown that one person standing up to injustice could inspire hundreds to stand with them. The real victory wasn't in the trophies or the changed policies. It was in every woman who now picked up a rifle, knowing she had just as much right to excellence as anyone else. And that was a shot that would echo forever.